Hi, everyone. It is so lovely to be here, and I'm so thankful to be here. It's bright and early over in California, but it's the perfect way to start my week. So, today we're going to talk about No More Imposter. Once again, my name is Chloe Messdaghi, and I'm the head of threat intelligence at Hidden Layer. And this kind of is an interesting conversation. It's a little bit different from maybe some of the stuff you've already seen today so far, but we're going to talk a little bit about our confidence. So, what is imposter syndrome? Well, there is a definition here on this slide, but it's a psychological pattern where individuals doubt their accomplishments and have a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. How this could look is that you go into a meeting and it's your first time ever in this meeting with this group of people, and they all have like PhDs in this area, but you don't. However, you've been in this space for some time and you are seen as an expert. But deep down inside, a part you feels like, do I belong here? Imposter syndrome can show up in so many different ways, but it's usually the feeling of I don't belong here, or I'm not good enough, or it could be anything from I don't see any representation of myself in here. So I'm kind of feeling like, do I belong? Or is there anyone who looks like me in the room? And even if that's just the case, that can also cause a problem. So, some common signs and symptoms is the self doubt. It's, do I belong here? Do I deserve to be here? Like, I don't know anything about this topic suddenly. It could be also this overachieving, like you want to be the best that you can of yourself, or you want to constantly prove that you have the ability to learn, but also attributing success to external factors. For example, if someone asks, how did you get to where you are? You would say, by pure luck and timing. This is kind of a phrase you may hear once in a while from experts, but usually it's because they put a lot of work into it. And that's one of the reasons why they have succeeded so much in life in their career. Or the fear of not living up to expectations, where a part of you thought, like, well, I thought that I would know everything in this one subject, but apparently I don't know this one thing. And so I'm concerned someone's going to ask me about this one particular topic, and I don't know how to give that topic. So overall, the fears of like, am I good enough? Do I belong here? Are the overarching themes you're going to see when it comes to imposter syndrome. And about 70% of people experience imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. Now, the one thing that a lot of people may not be familiar with is that in 1987, there was a research paper that came out and coined the term imposter syndrome. So these two researchers were trying to understand, why were women at their university feeling like they don't belong or they're not good enough in the area that they're focused on. And one of the things that they realized was because they were the only ones in the room, so the only women in the room. However, I just want to point out, even though that study came out about women, it affects everyone. It can affect anyone regardless of their gender, age, or occupation. But one thing to know about imposter syndrome is the whole feeling of, do I belong here? Or also, am I good enough? These are not really like an imposter syndrome per se. It's more of a confidence situation about, do I feel comfortable in this room? Do I feel comfortable in the knowledge that I have? But also, when you're a high achieving individual, this could also become one of those things where you're going to deal with a little bit more than usual, because you're always trying to be the best that you possibly can, or it could just be to just make sure that you know everything. Let's just be honest. You know everything about this particular topic because you're worried someone's going to catch that you don't know something, so thus you don't know anything. Now, there's a couple myths about imposter syndrome. One is only women have experienced it, and that's not true whatsoever. Men can also experience this. Even if you're non-binary, you can experience this. It doesn't matter what your gender is. at the end of the day, it's if you feel like you belong in that room and that you have the ability to know the content very well, then you're not going to be dealing with imposter syndrome as much. But the thing is that men do experience it. And one of the examples I like to share is for if you have like autism or ADHD and you go into a room or a meeting and you feel like you're the only one who's neurodivergent, this may make you feel like this may not be an environment where you belong in. Instead, it may feel like you're an outcaster. Myth 2. So, imposter syndrome is a mental illness. It is not. It's a psychological pattern, not a diagnosable mental illness. So, what does that mean? Psychological pattern. This is more of someone feeling these ways when something comes up. So, say for example, if you go into meetings where you are the only person with your background, and that makes you feel uncomfortable because you're the only one, that could be an issue. But sometimes it could be a reaction to our environment. So, say for example, if I go into a room and everyone in that room are male presenting and I'm the only woman in the room, I'm going to feel uncomfortable perhaps because in the past, men may have like interrupted when I talked or repeated what I said and took credit for work. And so, because of a past, this could make me feel more uncomfortable. And this could allow me to develop symptoms of something like imposter syndrome. But the reality is that imposter syndrome uh, is something that can be managed. It's the feelings of self-doubt can reoccur. And that's the thing. It's like you're never fully cured of like not having imposter syndrome. But it is something that you can have these feelings over time. You may have bouts in your life where you're confident in something, and then a year goes by and you don't feel as confident. Or you're learning a new subject and everyone around you seems to know this subject so much better or more confident than you. And so it makes you feel uncomfortable. And so you can also feel like you have imposter syndrome in those moments. So just a reality check here is that imposter syndrome affects all genders. Like I said, even though it was coined back in the day by a couple professors and researchers about women, but it is all genders. It is a common experience. It's not a mental disorder. And managing imposter syndrome is an ongoing process. It isn't just a cure-all. It's something that comes through in and out of your life. So it's more about developing these coping strategies and resilience, but also understand why you're feeling this way and how do you go about feeling a little bit better. So I wanted to share an experience that I've had of imposter syndrome is that I remember at an event about a year ago, I was in DC and this event was a huge, huge thing for my career. And I remember getting into my hotel room and just feeling like I don't belong there. I had zero confidence and I'm wondering why was I even invited to this event? And so I remember at that moment looking up and trying to understand why was I feeling this way? And there was many different reasons why, but overall I felt like I didn't belong in that room. And so I remember in the hotel room making a list in my journal of things that I have achieved that I thought I would never be able to achieve. So then if I ever have any of those moments later down the road, then I would look at that list. And by looking at that list, I would be able to recognize that, oh, wait, I've done all these other things. So yeah, no, I deserve to be in that room. So coping strategies is about finding something that works for you where it reinforces how you feel about yourself, but also giving you that confidence that you need. So, common triggers around this, and we've touched on some of it, but we're going to go into each one of these. So, external factors, a high pressure environments, a competitive workplace, or academia. What does that mean? That means that you're working somewhere where the environment isn't healthy. A competitive or a high pressure environment is not usually a healthy work environment. It's an environment where you constantly have to be on your toes, but also because there may be political games being played, or you have someone trying to steal your work, throwing you on a bus. There's so many different things that can cause you to get overwhelmed. And one of the things that people may understand is that you start getting these feelings of, I don't belong here, but you can also may feel like you're going crazy. And I know this sounds really weird, but if you're in an environment where it's really unhealthy, like we're talking about emotionally abusive, like you have a boss who talks down to you, interrupts you, takes credit for your ideas, slanders you in meetings, that's not going to be good on you. And it may make you feel like it's got to be me. I'm the problem. It's got to be me because it's easier to blame myself, right? But at the end of the day, uh, that might just be because you have a bad manager, an unhealthy manager. And when you have an unhealthy manager, then that means that these high pressure environments are going to deteriorate your mental health, where you will be questioning everything, which makes you feel like you are going crazy because you don't know what is happening. How did we get here? How did that happen? And so when you're in that kind of work environment, high pressure environments like that can really impact your mental health and can contribute to having feelings of imposter syndrome. Now, new roles or responsibilities, promotions, career change. Say, for example, that you were on a blue team in security, you're on the defensive side, and you decide to make the switch to the red team, the offensive side of things. Now you have new roles and responsibilities. So thus you're playing a game of catch up. Everyone else seems like they know what they're doing and you're still learning on the job. But it doesn't mean that you don't deserve to be there, but it can trigger you to feel like they're going to find I'm a fraud. And the thing is, you're not a fraud. You got that job because of your experience and they believe in you, your employer. But it can still make you feel inadequate. Now, lack of representation DEI is really important to note here because the original study about imposter syndrome was about women. The reason that women were experiencing that in their research was because they were the only ones in the room or the only ones in the department. So when they would go in these classes, they would be the woman who would try to speak up, but people wouldn't take her seriously. So it impacted her. Her environment impacted her, in other words. And so lack of representation of being in a room when you feel like you're the only one can always be an issue because even if you walk in confident with everything, there may be individuals that have unconscious biases against who you are and may actually take credit for your work without knowing it, but maybe they do know that they are, and so on. And so this can also trigger these feelings because if you're feeling ignored in a room when you're supposed to be an expert, that can also contribute to, oh, I guess maybe I don't know anything. Now, there are internal factors, perfectionism, setting unrealistically high standards. I don't know about you, but if you were growing up in a household where you were celebrated by your grades in school, that could be one of the things that can impact you. Or if you're in any sports in school when growing up, is trying to be the best that you possibly can, and that is on the sense of perfectionism. The feel of failure that you're not gonna make it, or someone's gonna notice that I don't know one particular thing, so thus I am a fraud in everything. So it's the overwhelming fear of making mistakes. You don't want to make a mistake, and a lot of that, once again, could come from your childhood. But it can also happen when you work in a toxic work environment, like I mentioned at the beginning of the slide. Alone is really important to understand. When you feel like you are alone, you feel like you're an outcast, that you don't fit in. So it's hard to feel connected. And when we feel connected with others, we feel appreciated, we feel like there's mutual respect. But when we feel alone, it's very hard because it feels like it's you against the world. And so these feelings can also kind of contribute to feeling like you have imposter syndrome. Now, the impact. So I kind of touched on this briefly, but the whole thing about imposter syndrome is really about your self-esteem, your confidence. It's being stressed. It's about having anxiety. It's about avoiding opportunities because you don't think you're good enough. You don't belong in that room. You don't belong to go to that conference and so on. So on individuals, it can look very differently. For some, it might be the anxiety and stress of like not knowing everything. So it can contribute to having kind of like not the best sleep at night, as you can imagine, like insomnia throughout the night. If you know you have to present at a meeting and you're worried that you're going to make a mistake or you don't know every answer that someone's going to ask you. But also decrease of self-esteem and confidence. Um, if you do work in an environment where it's not healthy, it's very hard to feel like you know your subject and that you're confident to speak up. That's what toxic work environments can do. They lower your confidence and your ability to perform your job. So this can decrease your self-esteem at the end of the day. The avoidance of challenges and opportunities, that is definitely one of the things that you can know if you're dealing with this. For example, if you're asked to join a panel conversation for work about a topic, you may feel like, I don't know everything, so I don't feel comfortable getting on stage for that panel. But the one thing you can always know is that you don't need to know everything to be on that panel. If you don't know something, you just say, that's a great question. I don't know that. And that should be fine enough. But if deep down inside you're worried that that might be presenting as someone who doesn't know your subject and that you are a fraud per se, then that's going to make you want to avoid those type of opportunities and challenges. Now, on organizations, the one thing to know is that organizations do play a very, very big role of whether or not you may have imposter syndrome. So you may think that you don't have it at this time, but say you get a new job and the work environment isn't as healthy. You have a manager that doesn't listen to you. You go into meetings and your colleagues talk over you. Or it could be simply that anytime you deliver any of your assignments to your boss, that it's harshly graded or harshly taken in. So this can lead to you feeling inadequate with your job. And it may make you feel like I don't belong here. Maybe I don't belong in this subject. Maybe I don't know anything in this space. Maybe I need to look into another industry. So organizations play such a large role to your mental health. But if you are in a work environment where imposter syndrome is occurring, you'll see that there's a reduce of productivity due to lack of confidence. Also, employee turnover from burnout and dissatisfaction. Now, know about one thing is that it doesn't mean that the turnover is because of people are leaving the company. Actually, if anything, in toxic work environments, how it usually works is that they do layoffs quite a bit because they don't see that the employee is ever doing their job properly. But that could also just be because you came in very confident, but you had a boss who just took that carpet and pulled it underneath you. And so the confidence level just got shot. So this can make things really hard to get things done, but also confidently done. And so this can lead to you being on the cutting board per se at the employer. There's also lower levels of innovation and risk taking because you're so concerned of failure at this point. If you have imposter syndrome, you're not going to go and try to take on something new. You're going to be more conservative about what you do, what you say, and you don't really take risks. But the thing is that when you're in an environment where risks are taken that can help better the company or operations, those are usually people that end up getting promoted. But once again, if you're in a bad workplace, you're not going to be feeling comfortable to take any of those risks. Instead, you may just keep it to yourself. So there are strategies to overcome, but once again, it's not really overcoming it. It's something that will come in waves throughout your life. But it's to recognize and acknowledge feelings. The most important thing is to understand why you may be feeling that way. Like in the example I said, when I was in DC, I felt like I was dealing with imposter syndrome. I knew something was wrong. I knew that I needed to believe in myself because who else is going to believe in me other than myself? And so I remember that journal entry. So sometimes what might be really good is to journal. If you have struggled to kind of understand what's going on, sometimes we don't really know what's happening in our head as much as we think that we do. Sometimes our loved ones will point out, like, hey, is everything okay? But journaling can be something really like healthy for you to know what is going on because you'll be in a different zone writing out feelings and trying to understand why you're feeling a certain way. And that could be really powerful to know what is happening within yourself. You could reframe those negative thoughts. So challenge and replace with self doubt and positive with positive affirmations. So what does this look like? Instead of saying, oh, I don't know everything in this one topic, I'm going to fail. If someone asks me anything, you can say to yourself, I don't know everything, but no one does. Which is true, right? No matter if you're an expert in something, you don't know everything. People look through things through different lenses. They're going to have different questions. They're going to see different connections than you will. So they're going to ask questions that you may not be able to answer, and that's okay. So it's always important is to acknowledge that if you don't know something, don't beat yourself up about it. Instead, learn about it. And then you can provide that answer to that person who asked you that question. But once again, that's if you work in an environment where you feel like you can be yourself in a sense, where you feel confident in your abilities. So a healthy work environment is going to help you with the reframing. However, if you work in a toxic work environment, that's going to be a little bit tricky to reframe your negative thoughts, but it is doable. But it's also a time where if you recognize you're in a bad place, it may be good to start looking elsewhere. You can celebrate the achievements, keep a record of accomplishment and positive feedback. Like that journal entry, I always take it with me wherever I go. So if I ever have one of those moments again, I just look at it and just to remind myself, I do deserve to be in that room. I do deserve to be at that event because of the things I've achieved. But you can also do is get a little index card or a Post-it, and you can write down things that you've achieved that you didn't think you would be able to achieve, or things that you're really proud of, and you can put it in your wallet if they ever need to pull something out. Now, when it comes to professional strategies on here to not once again overcome in a sense, but in the moment when you're going through a wave, is to seek feedback and mentorship. So asking someone to give you constructive feedback is really important, but make sure you do it to someone, have that conversation with someone that you respect and they respect you, but also someone who's you believe in their opinion and their opinion matters to you. So finding a mentor can be really helpful because you can always go to them and ask them, did I do the right thing? Is there something I need to focus on that I'm not focusing on in my career? And that can be incredibly helpful for you on your journey in your career. I can tell you I've had times in my life where I didn't have a mentor and it made things a lot harder in many ways. But having a mentor allows me to run ideas by them and also to get constructive feedback. So I can be a better version of myself, but also to be getting better at being an expert in certain fields. Set realistic goals is another one. So you break down those large tasks into manageable steps. Sometimes we get really excited when we're taking on a project, but it can also be very overwhelming. So it's best is to kind of break it down into small chunks. So having realistic goals is really important for your confidence instead of saying like, I will I guess one could say it's like, I will get a degree within 4 years. That would be a realistic goal, but it is quite a large role. Goal. So you want to break it down to manageable steps. And how this could look like is you can just say that I want to get through these 3 courses, and in 3 of these courses, I want to get this grade, but I also want to learn these things from these following courses in that quarter. So you break it down by quarterly instead of looking at the realistic goal of, like, I should say more the unrealistic goal that you'll get a certain GPA in 4 years. This makes it a little bit easier and it helps with your confidence because you're doing one thing at a time and you're checking off your list. You build a support network. So surround yourself with supportive colleagues and friends. This is so important. Having a supportive network while you're going through something in your life is always helpful to have. They're there to, for you to bring comfort to them, but for them to bring comfort to you, and also to help you out, spot anything that you may not be spotting in your own personal life. And then also take those red flags seriously. Like I mentioned earlier, if you ever feel like you're going crazy or you started a job and your confidence has just reduced significantly, these are usually signs that you may want to go somewhere else and start looking. And the reason for that is that usually if we've had a change in our personality or our mental behavior within, working at a job, that's usually a sign you need to leave. Especially if you're dealing with like burnout. Burnout's usually one of the biggest signs. And if you're working in a place that is unhealthy, if you're in a managerial role, that can be seen usually in the first or second years into the role. But if you are in a role where you're not managing people, that can usually happen within 1 year. For many, it can actually start within the first 6 months. So if you start feeling burned out at work, this is usually a sign that you may want to start looking elsewhere, because burnout from a job is usually a sign that things aren't good and your manager is not either respecting you or the work environment isn't good for you. And you don't want that to impact you and your career later down the road, especially on your mental health. So organizations play such a huge role in this. It's not just on you about how you may be developing feelings of like imposter syndrome, because it can literally be from a bad work environment. And that's usually what we see. So creating a supportive work environments are incredibly important. So you want to encourage open conversation where people can discuss mental health, but also they can discuss how they feel about certain projects, and knowing that they're not going to deal with any consequences if they don't want to do a certain project outside their role. So you want to encourage open conversations. You want a manager where you can talk about certain things with them. That's really important for you to feel heard and seen. And when we're feeling heard and seen, we're able to do so much in our career. So definitely make sure you have open conversations. And if you don't have that with your current manager, maybe get like a 15 minutes on their calendar and talk a little bit. Once again, if you feel comfortable in doing so, if you don't feel safe doing so, then don't do it. But at least find someone else at the company where you can have those conversations with that you can trust. If you're an organization to provide mental health resources, there are companies out there that do provide um, outsource for counseling, and also services that are referred out. So you can do workshops on like anxiety or burnout or anything like that. Foster a culture of recognition and support is so important, is to recognize employees for what they have done and achieved, and making sure that they get credit for the work that they've done. It's always important to recognize people, because when we recognize people, they feel like they belong there. When we don't recognize them, it becomes a problem where they don't feel seen or heard. And then slowly that kind of eats at someone's confidence. So it's so important to recognize individuals and the incredible work that they're doing. Leadership training. One of the things that, I've said so many times here is when you have a bad boss, a lot of things can go wrong. And leadership training is one of those things. there's there are so many managers out there that may not have self-awareness, not understanding that what they're doing to the employees can be a problem, the way that they talk to their employees, how that can be an issue. And so it's really important for them to have continuous leadership training instead of just getting the role and then no training whatsoever. It's important for them to continue to keep learning on how to be a good leader and also how to empower their team. But I really want to reiterate that systematic challenge of exclusion and bias in the workplace. To that end, the solution lies in fixing the systems and organizations, not individual. And that's why representation does matter. Really being the only one in the room can really contribute this. Even if you're in a workplace where it's healthy for many, doesn't mean it's healthy for everyone. So it's so important is that people feel like they belong when they go into work, and when they leave, they still feel like they belong. And so the most important thing that you can do is if you're a leader of an organization is to ensure that. And also understand that representation does absolutely matter. Being the only one in the room can be such a challenge for so many people because usually it's the only ones in the room that tend to be silenced. And so that's why representation does matter. It's good to have people that have different opinions be at the table, who look different from you at the table as well. So here are some resources of some books. This list was provided by Harvard Business Review, but these are all great books to start getting into imposter syndrome and to understand it further. But if you really want to read something a little bit shorter, there was actually an article in The Atlantic a couple of years ago that talked with the actual original folks that coined the term imposter syndrome and talked about the history of why they said that and why there's parts of it that they have problems with it. And so it is a great read. I think the article can take anywhere from like 5 to 15 minutes to read, depending on how your reading level can be. But it is great read. But these books are also fantastic as well. I do recommend is to check out some of the Harvard Business Review articles on imposter syndrome. There was another one that came out about imposter syndrome doesn't exist, and that it has a lot to do with people not being inclusive in the workplace or in academia. So say, for example, if you are a woman, you are not going to feel as comfortable in a male-dominated scene. And so it talked about that in the article and also mentioned about people of color as well. So the biggest summary, I hope, is understanding that the persistence of self-doubt and the fear of being exposed as a fraud is the general feeling of imposter syndrome. But the thing to know about it is that it can be seen differently in every single person, and the reasons behind it can be different for every person too. But the thing that you can always recognize is that it can increase anxiety, can cause stress, it can decrease self-esteem, and also your productivity. And one of the other things is to understand is, do not forget this, is that the importance of recognizing and acknowledging feelings, not just for yourself, but for others too. If they come to you talking about how they don't feel as confident anymore, listen to them, maybe point them in the right direction. But usually a change in behavior, a change of mental health around others is usually a sign that, maybe they need some extra support at this time. So acknowledge your own feelings too. And if you do struggle to do that and have self-awareness about how you feel, I do recommend is to journal. That can be so helpful, especially if you don't really feel comfortable talking to people about how you feel. Journaling is a great way how to get into your head and to understand the depth of it. But also therapy. If that is something that is needed, therapy is a great way to channel how you're feeling and having a deeper understanding while having someone help guide you through those feelings and understanding about why you're in that situation. Reframe negative thoughts. Is it you or the situation? And I love this question because you can always ask yourself, is it me or is it the situation I'm in that's causing me to have these feelings? So being able to understand those two separate places is incredibly important for understanding how you're feeling and how you treat how you feel. So if it is you, um, maybe just figure out, have you always been this way? Has it been no matter what work environment you work in, you're feeling this way? Then that might be something to deal with your emotions of why. Why are you feeling this way? And to have a good understanding about why. And it doesn't have to be internally like the issues are happening. It can still also be reflected of being represented in a room still, or the situation, which can be from a bad workplace. Once again, if you are feeling burned out at work, it may be a good time to look at that a little bit deeper. Now, celebrate your achievements. Like I said, you could put like in a small card, you could keep it in your wallet, or you can, put it in a journal and like carry it with you, whatever that makes sense for you to do it. It has helped me several times, I would say, is having that list so I can always look at it and be like, okay, so that's what's going on right now. But also, it's good to remind yourself that you've done quite a bit in your life. Even celebrate the small wins in life, because you've you put a lot of time and energy into it, and that's what matters at the end of the day. I just want to say thank you all for existing. If you want to reach out to me, that is my LinkedIn link. And then if you want to DM me on Twitter, Instagram, it is open. Feel free to reach out. And there is my website, securebychloe.com. More than happy to answer any questions. But also, if you have any questions at this time, more than happy to answer them. I'll give everyone a couple minutes if you do. And it's okay if you're shy about it. There's no worries. Whenever we talk about something that is personal, sometimes it can be hard to ask questions. All right. Well, it's been such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And it was fantastic to start my morning off with y'all. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. And once again, thank you so much. And I hope to hear from some of you soon. Reach out anytime. Bye.